Good afternoon. This is John Horowitz, President and CEO of Easterseals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Thank you for joining us. During a time of so many challenges, our vision to create a hopeful, inclusive community where all people realize their potential and live meaningful lives is more important than ever. If you'd like to get involved in helping Easterseals realize that vision or have any questions, please email us at info@eseal.org. We've been so delighted to host the Candid Conversations webinar series, bringing together leading experts on topics such as how to talk to our children about racism and the ADA at 30, and the work still to be done. You can access replays of past webinars on the Easterseals DC MD VA YouTube. As COVID stretches into almost a year of isolation and remote learning, our team has heard so many questions about the impact of remote learning on our entire society, and particularly on our children, their educational, social, and emotional development now and for the future. That's why I'm so excited for today's panel. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Tara Phillips, the Senior Director, Child Development at Easterseals, DC, Maryland, Virginia. An educator with over 20 years experience, Tara leads our child development team to ensure that all children, including those with disabilities and other risk factors, such as income or military background, have a great early education experience and are well prepared socially, emotionally, and academically for school when they reach school age. As we turn to Tara, please take a moment to complete the poll on your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. As you can see on your screen, we invite you to participate in this brief poll as I introduce you to our esteemed panel joining us today. Erin Carroll is the Director of Early Childhood for the Virginia Department of Education. In this role, Erin works with her team to support the implementation and improvement of Virginia's early childhood programs, including public school, pre-K, Head Start, and private childcare. Hi, Erin. Thank you for joining us. Michael Flood is the Senior Vice President and General Manager at Khajiit, a wireless provider serving off-campus wireless broadband for school districts and mobile phones and service for kids. With over 20 years of telecom industry experience, Michael is a recognized expert in education technology. He is an active member of the Consortium on School Networking, serving on the board of directors since 2015. Thank you for joining us, Michael. Dr. Lynette Fraga is the Chief Executive Officer of Child Care Aware of America, a national membership-based nonprofit organization working to advance a high-quality, affordable child care system that supports children's growth, development, and early education. She began her career in early childhood as a teacher in infant, toddler, and preschool classrooms, and has since held positions at the local, state, and national level. Welcome, Dr. Fraga. Thanks for joining us. Christina St.Marthe is the Easterseals Center Director at the National Archives and Records in College Park, Maryland. With over 20 years experience in early childhood education, she is currently managing Easterseals at Home program, designed to empower and provide parents access to Easterseals teachers, materials, and books to ensure their child continues to thrive, even while staying safe at home. Thanks for joining us, Christina. And Dr. Gigi Toussaint-Green is primary early childhood mental health consultant with the DC Department of Behavioral Health, DC SEED program. She has worked in the field of early childhood for over 13 years and works to empower parents and caregivers by providing strategies to enhance their knowledge and skills in their roles as primary educators. Welcome, Dr. Gigi. Thank you all for joining us. Now let's get started. I have a list of questions and I have a lot of things that we're probably going to talk about, but I don't want anyone to feel like we have to follow the questions exactly. If something comes up, if you know that there's some information that you can share that may expand on a topic area that we're discussing, feel free to make this as informal, and information sharing is possible. I am going to start with Dr. Fraga. Can you discuss the importance of early childhood programs for young children's social, emotional development, and the impact of the pandemic on children and families?
Thanks, Tara. I would be happy to. And thanks to Easterseals for inviting me to join you today. CCAOA and Easterseals have been partners in our shared commitment to children and families, and specifically with support for the Exceptional Family Member Respite Care Program. So big shout out to that. Really appreciate being with you today. And deep appreciations for all of the work of everyone on the call today. So to answer your question, which is a really big one, the first 5 years of a child's life present tremendous opportunities to promote social emotional skills that build a strong foundation for school and life. I think the science of the last 10, 20 years have really been amazing in terms of supporting what I think many of us who've been in the field for decades have espoused, which is that the early years are so critically important to long-term outcomes for kids. At the same time, it's a uniquely vulnerable period as well if a solid foundation is not provided and children aren't nurtured during such a critical time. So these early care and education programs are critical to an early childhood, to a child's development. And specifically early care and education professionals, those amazing adults who work in relationship with children are so incredible and so much critical partners for with parents and supporting children's development and ensuring that the youngest learners are ready for school and on the path to success. So where are we now? Young children have experienced so many changes due to COVID-19. We all have experienced many, many changes. Social distancing from trusted caregivers and loved ones is certainly a significant one. Parents suddenly working from home, transitioning back to childcare as programs reopen have been families' experience. They're experiencing economic as well as a public health crisis. There's a real lack of security, which is really impacting our young children, which includes food insecurity and housing insecurity, work stress, and unemployment, particularly in fact affecting women and often women of color. These stressors are real and can impact a child's healthy development, their social and emotional development, and their behaviors and their relationships. And this really starts from birth. I think it's really important to name when we're talking about early childhood, we are talking about infants and toddlers and young preschoolers, as well as young school agers. Researchers at the University of Oregon have conducted national surveys of parents to gather information about the needs and well-being of children and their families during the pandemic. And I just wanted to quickly share that what they've learned from the survey, I think, is really important over time. They saw large increases from pre-pandemic levels in both caregiver stress and children's emotional and behavioral difficulties. And this is a real challenge as we're asking, what kinds of behaviors, fussy and defiant behaviors, for example, or fearful or anxious in the past week. So these surveys are really demonstrating the implications and impact on young children and on early childhood. However, I think it's also important to raise up that adult and young children's mental health difficulties had begun to flatten, actually, and even diminish from middle and upper income households. However, among lower income households, they were continuing to increase as the weeks went by. And this is a real concern that the research has expressed around access to resources and what was actually available in communities and quality early childhood programs in order to support parents and children through this. So early childhood programs are critical. They were before the pandemic, and they continue to be incredibly critical as we move through the pandemic and certainly as our communities begin to open up.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Gigi, would you like to answer that for us, discussing the importance of early childhood programs for young children, social emotional development, and the impact you see?
Sure. I forgot I was on mute.
That's okay.
So yeah, early childhood early childhood development programs is very important for children during that 0 to 6 period during the pandemic. One, of course, we know, as Dr. Fraga said, that there's food insecurities across the country. And some of the children, the only place that they get a well-balanced meal is at school. And so when you don't have school or they're not able to come to childcare, then a lot of them are not getting the nutrients or the nutrition that they need. Parents are getting overwhelmed, especially families who don't have the resources or don't have those skills to support children's social emotional development. And when they come to school, it's the one place that they feel safe some of the times. Not all the time, but there are a lot of the times children feel safe when they're at school, when their routine is predictable. And we've seen, based on children coming back into the center who has been home, that when they come back, their routines are way off. It's hard to get them back into routines that they used to have. And so teachers are getting really, really frustrated because they're saying, okay, I can't get this child to go back to take a nap. He's having behavioral problems. We can't get them to learn the new routines. And so being in the schools or in the early childhood settings is helping to keep that routine. It's helping the parents to be able to cope. You have parents who have not been able to take care of their children's educational needs or to have them all day. Parents are used to having their children for a little while in the day. By the time they come home, it's almost time to go to bed. And now I have to be with my child from sunup to bedtime. And parents are getting frustrated. Some of them are yelling and screaming. And so the children, they're getting anxious as well. Mm-hmm. When they're in the school setting or the early childhood setting, it takes that away from the parents. Mm-hmm. And so they no longer have to play the role of teacher, mommy, and everything else. They can just be mom and let the teachers do what the teachers need to do. So during the pandemic, it's really for the children's safety, most of all, it's really important for them to be in those early childhood settings. Although routines have changed there.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I want to just go over to Miss Christina. I know that you may be able to add a little bit to that, what it is that you're seeing now that the centers have reopened. For those of you on the panel and participating, the Easterseals Child Development Centers closed in March when everyone closed down. I believe it was around March 16th. And our centers began to reopen in June. So 2 reopened in June and then 1 reopened in September. And so there were some things, we had some challenges, Christina, just kind of listening to what Dr. Fraga and Dr. Gigi both said. You want to add some things to what it is that we see in the center environment now regarding the emotional development and impact of the pandemic?
Definitely. Again, thank you for having me. I definitely agree with both Dr. Gigi and Dr. Fraga. That emotional and social emotional component is what has kind of been the issue with children being home for so long and then trying to get reacclimated to their classrooms. It's different. They're having to social distance in their classrooms. That peer-to-peer interaction that they were used to prior to the pandemic is no more for now. So they are having to try to figure out how to engage and interact with their friends that they were close to before the pandemic. Coming back, they again have to social distance in the classroom. So it has definitely been challenging. But the great thing is the teachers are trying to figure out creative ways for them to still get that peer-to-peer interaction, but still be safe.
Yeah, yeah. So Erin, would you like to add something to that or discuss? Do you have anything that you'd like to add about the importance of early childhood programs and social emotional development during the pandemic?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of great points have been made by the panelists already. It seems we are not lacking our belief in the importance and significance of positive early childhood, which I wouldn't expect us to be on this panel, but the importance of positive early childhood experiences here. I can talk about this a little bit more, but we really, unfortunately, can already see in some of our data the negative impacts of virtual learning and the general decline and lack of social opportunity for our young children in some of the data we collect statewide in Virginia already. And unfortunately, you know, I think we expect to in years to come. I think what's really important for us as we look around as program leaders and think about working with our policymakers is thinking about what will be the recovery from this, what is going to be the return, and how do we make sure, you know, we are in a place where we lost some months, a year of progress with some of our littlest learners all across our region, all across our world, really. But what are the measures that we'll be able to take specifically focused on this age group in the years to come? And that'll be very important.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to add a little bit that some of the things that we are talking about today, I think I mentioned this earlier, that we, as far as remote learning is concerned, we're going to be changing this discussion in what I'm going to believe is the very near future to transitioning back into the classroom setting or the early childhood setting. And that's going to take on another set of concerns as we are bringing more children back into the setting, specifically those children whose parents felt it safe to keep them home this entire time. I am looking forward to, and we have already started to plan for returning to the classroom in anticipation of it being a bit difficult. Becoming very creative and being more creative than we used to be is what I like to say, because I think we've always been creative, but we're going to have to use a little ingenuity to create the space and the environment that makes them not only be happy to be back, but reduce the level of anxiety or stressors for the teachers who are in the program. So as I mentioned that, I wanted to talk about some of the resources for families, caregivers, or teachers to help a child navigate through the challenges of remote learning. And I'm going to kind of just throw that out there to anyone. What remote learning has brought to support their emotional and mental health. Who would like to take on that question? If you look away, I'm going to pick you because I think you're trying to hide.
So this is Michael. I can jump in a little bit on this. So, you know, the transition to remote learning in the spring of last year, so if we go back almost a year now, right, we're 10 months back, was very sudden for a great number of families. I happen to live in an urban, you know, very diverse urban district, large district. And so, you know, there's a wide variety of circumstances amongst the households throughout the school district. And this has been true all across the country. So we've been able to work with about 3,000 school districts across the United States and Canada during the pandemic from Khajiit. And our primary focus is on the technology side, but that's, you know, a component of broader equity issues that the district is helping their communities address. I heard several folks mention food insecurity, and, you know, we've seen the need to get food and meals out to families actually overlap with what we do. So whereas we were at times equipping school buses to put Wi-Fi access into the communities, those same school buses were also being used to distribute meals. So you'd have families coming to pick up meals and also get online to download or upload assignments to and from their teachers when they did not have adequate broadband access at home. I think that it's very important when we talk about social emotional health for children, especially younger children. I'm thinking in my case, all the way from preschool up through elementary and middle school even. You mentioned routine. Routine is really critical. And I think that it's been very hard for a lot of families as they've gone in and out of hybrid learning, distance learning, back to school, no, wait, not back to school. You know, the switching has been very, very hard on a lot of families, especially those families who don't have adequate, you know, technology resources in the home, because that means that it's not just a matter of you're staying home and doing school from home today. It might be you're staying home and we've got to do 10 other things to figure out how to get you connected. And that becomes a really big stressor for children because they see the stress that their parents are feeling, they see the stress that their teachers are feeling, and they internalize that stress themselves as children as well. So to the degree that districts have been able to help supplement resources to overcome those issues and just take each piece of this, you know, equity equation that they can remove from the list of things the household has to deal with, that each piece of that helps stabilize that child's routine and helps stabilize that student's environment so that they can now connect and be in the class with their, you know, fellow classmates that they're used to seeing, whether they're seeing them online or in person, but they can now connect and see them and not be out, you know, at odds with their classmates because of a lack of equitable resources. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you. That's great. And it actually is going to take me to the next question, and you were going to be up for that question. So while we have certainly witnessed the challenges surrounding remote learning, we know there are many who could benefit from this. What do you see as the future of remote learning, and how do you think we can improve upon it?
Yeah, sure. So what's been interesting has been there have been a number of reports coming out. You know, you'll see stories that are people who really hate remote learning, and believe me, there's those. And then what we've also seen a lot of stories coming out about people who love remote learning. And
right.
And so different communities have had very different experiences. And let's not forget that before we switched over to either hybrid or distance learning programs, there were lots of students struggling with issues within their school environments.
Sure.
And for some populations, some of those stressors have actually been relieved in a distance learning environment. Some students who did not feel comfortable being as vocal or as participatory in a classroom setting have actually come out of their shells and been more active in a virtual setting where they feel less, you know, pressure on them. We've also seen students who maybe were, you know, bullied, you know, in the physical environment, who maybe don't face those same stressors in the remote learning environment. Not to say that that's a majority of students, but I think what this means for post-COVID is that post-COVID, there will be households who are eager to return to school, and there will also be households who want to continue to be served by a quality distance learning program. And I think really the phase we're entering in at the back half of this academic year and going into next academic year will be, how do we take the lessons learned for what worked and what didn't work, and then preserve a high quality distance learning option for families for whom that is their first choice going forward into the future.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I know my personal experience, my children, 2 of them are out of school already, but my youngest is in high school. She absolutely hates virtual learning. However, I have some friends who have children with IEPs or children with special needs, and in particular, children who are on the autism spectrum. They tend to have a much more success with hybrid, with remote learning, distance learning. And I've noticed that there's a difference in, you know, if you can pace yourself, sometimes that helps a lot. As you mentioned, not being in the classroom or not being in the building, having to move from classroom to classroom. I mean, there are lots of things. So I think it really has a lot to do with the learning style of the child. And also when you think about all the, I guess, variations in a school building, it will certainly have an impact on how well you're doing. So I actually have been reading some of those same studies that you're talking about, Michael, because it's interesting that you have a really good group who are just dying to get back into the building. And it's really interesting because prior to COVID, you did not have them. My daughter was not itching to go to school every day. Let me make that clear. However, now that she's been home all this time, she can't wait to get back in the building. So it's really an interesting phenomenon. I know that we have a lot more to learn and implement. So I look forward to seeing. Did anyone want to add to that, the challenges that we've witnessed to remote learning, and what do you think we can benefit from that?
I'm not sure it's, Tara, exactly connected to that, but it's somewhat connected. That I just felt, given the conversation thus far, I just wanted to raise up how critical families are in this conversation. And so as we're talking about supporting children at any age in an early childhood program, we're talking about not only what happens in that early childhood program, but also what happens in relationship with the families. Sure. And the kinds of supports and resources that are necessary to help to facilitate quality early childhood experiences, both within the program and at home. And so I get really curious about how remote learning or technology can be leveraged and utilized to strengthen relationships between families and their early childhood educator. As you know, not necessarily always thinking about the child as the receiver of that technology, but sure. To be able to facilitate stronger relationships between the early childhood program, the educator, and the parent and the family, I think is something we can explore. And that could be really beneficial for families in terms of resourcing and feeling engaged. Particularly given the fact that so many families are, work non-standard hours or may not be the pickup or the drop-off parent or be able to be engaged in different ways. So I am curious about how we can think about the utilization of technology in that way. And again, as we're thinking about parents as a really necessary, families as a really necessary part of the early childhood wellness equation, what are we doing to ensure that families are at a core of supports, and how are we engaging families, and how are we supporting families and their own self-care, and is technology an opportunity there as well? But certainly the necessity for us to ensure, particularly with the ages of the children that we're talking about, and if we're talking about children from birth through school age, how we engage parents as partners, I think is really critical, or the adults in a child's life is really critical moving forward.
I agree.
I like that, Dr. Fraga, because over the past 10 months, I think we're into right now, we've been seeing a lot of increase in people talking about self-care. And even families, not just early childhood teachers and providers who desperately need those self-care support, but the parents saying, hey, I'm overwhelmed. I can't take one more Zoom meeting, this to do that, to come to this, and I can't take any more. So we're trying to give those resources, but parents are at the point where it's just too much. And so it can be hard for them to do that. While online learning does pose a challenge, I do see a little benefit in that parents are able to be there for their children when they can, if they're able to sit with their child, because if you have a 3-year-old online, it's almost guaranteed that an adult has to be with them. I have a 5-year-old, just turned 5-year-old, and I literally have to stay with her sometimes when she's online because she gets distracted, she's doing something. So it gives parents the opportunity to see what's happening in the classroom, to really see how the teachers, the relationship, the true relationship that happens between the children and the teacher. Because at some point they forget that mom and dad is there, and they go back to who they are, and they get to see what is really going on in the classroom. Does that teacher really have the well-being of my child at heart? It also gives them an opportunity to learn how children play and interact, and learn through playing, and be able to support their children once they're off of the camera. And so it's a good way to draw the parents in, and maybe talk to the parents when the teachers are online with the children, because they really cannot do it without the parents. And I know we did pass that question, but the resources, there have been a lot of resources available for families during this time. Of course, the number one I would tell any parent is to talk to your teacher. They can be your best resource. But also the Barton Lab from, I think it's Vanderbilt University, has just a wealth of information to support families with children's social emotional learning, and during this challenging time, what to look for, what strategies they can use. And even if the parents can't go and access it themselves, maybe the early childhood providers can download those resources and provide it to the parents, because it's hard for parents dealing with social emotional challenges at home when they're used to having it at school. And so they have done a wonderful, wonderful job in making sure that children have those resources. And of course, Pinterest and YouTube as well for families.
You cannot do without Pinterest and YouTube. That is the truth. Thank you for that. I agree. I think that being able to utilize technology in different ways is going to be really important. I also want to share, Dr. Fraga, you mentioned just different ways of connecting families and classrooms and with the children in the classroom and teachers. One of the things that we are implementing at our centers now, because of where we are today through the pandemic, is doing parent-teacher conferences on Zoom. I mean, you know, Zoom has been around for a while, but we never considered one time using parent-teacher conferences, using Zoom for parent-teacher conferences. And now that we can't, parents are not allowed to come into the building, and we are still required to make that part of our annual routine, using Zoom is a really great idea. And we sat back and thought, why didn't we think of this before? So it's really interesting. But yeah, technology is going to take us to a different level, I believe, with connecting with parents. And as you mentioned, Dr. Gigi, being able to allow parents to see what's happening in the classroom, and also having the teachers be able to connect with the children who are not necessarily in the classroom. And so it's going to take us to another level, I believe. We have a question from the chat. The question is from the audience. What are you hearing about how school districts intend to make up for a year or more of remote learning, in particular for special education? Following any natural disasters, students routinely receive compensatory services per the U.S. Department of Education. Erin, do you think you want to jump in here? Do you know, are you hearing anything about how school districts intend to make up for the year that's lost?
Yeah, I think especially in our early years, there's going to be a challenge. I do think, you know, as we continue to look at the additional relief funding that is coming our way, there's probably a shift from addressing the virtual learning, and as I was speaking to earlier, starting to think about what the return looks like. So are there literal ways to get more opportunities into students' hands, whether that's an extended year option, extended day option, to literally get them more time in the classroom? Beyond that, I think there's probably ongoing considerations of how do we continue to use technology even when life goes back to more quote unquote normal, whatever that is, in the future years. Who knows what that is? How do we use technology to, you know, now that we've mastered Zoom, now that we've mastered how to learn online, how do we use that to make a more well-rounded experience for kids to make up some of this space and time, and, you know, continue to build on some of these bonds that we are hopefully forming effectively with all of our parents. As far as, you know, local school divisions, that will obviously vary quite a bit. I think the concerns around the children with special needs and IEPs are going to continue to be the centerpiece of these conversations. School divisions have been incredibly innovative in their abilities and their approaches to handling all of the many important requirements related to managing IEPs virtually, but I think, you know, there will be some reassessing as we get more accustomed to going back in and what needs to be caught up for that very important group.
Sure.
Could I jump in on this for a moment, Tara?
Sure.
So first of all, I love Erin's answer. I will say, from what we're hearing, there will be a lot of summer learning programs this summer, you know, that will attempt to identify gaps that can be made up during the course of the summer, which is not, of course, a full school year. So it's going to be compressed, but an attempt to keep students on track so that they can make progress onto the next grade. losing as little time as possible. I think that is definitely going to happen. We're hearing from many school districts that they're planning for, budgeting for, scheduling for increased summer learning activities this summer. So I definitely think that's going to happen. There was something else Erin touched on there, though, that I wanted to bring out, because it is something that even before COVID, I believed had enormous potential. And that is the ability for students to access programs and resources that are not offered at their local school through, distance learning and virtual resources. And so I think that cannot be understated. When we look at the rapid adjustments schools have had to go through in response to COVID, the primary modus operandi has been, let's get this student into their classes at their school remotely. Really, the larger opportunity that we're looking at in the future is, let's get this student into the best classes for that student wherever they're offered remotely. And once you expand the opportunity for the sorts of classes and extracurricular activities and all sorts of resources that students could access to beyond their local school, maybe even beyond their local district, to really be able to access a broader set of resources, we unlock a level of potential for our students that I think we have not yet unlocked. And I'm very excited about that as a post-COVID, what are we going to learn from all of this? I think that's an outcome that we can look forward to.
Yeah. And so, Michael, because you unmuted yourself, another question just came up from our audience. What tools does Khajiit offer to schools and parents to help them advance their technical skills using virtual learning resources?
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I believe Dr. Fraga had a comment on the last one as well, so I don't want to step on her toes too much, but I will say that we work primarily directly with schools, right? So we're working with schools, school districts, sometimes also with public libraries, entities like that. So we provide them with resources on how to design the technical environment to support learning, how to manage that so that students, often the students that are being served by our technology, come from homes that don't have a strong technical background. So we want to make sure that we're putting tools in the hands of those students that are safe, that are protected, that they can't go home and they're not just open on the internet, going to any resource anywhere. We want it to be a CIPA compliant environment. That's the Children's Internet Protection Act. So compliant there to make sure students are in a safe educational environment. And we help schools think about that and how to communicate that out to parents and families.
Okay. Dr. Fraga, you want to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, I'll add just a couple of things. And I really appreciate Erin and Michael's comments about schools. I think the first I would just raise up, just by way of learning, is that early care and education programs and schools, I think we could have done better in partnering throughout COVID for families who work and again, also have non-standard hour needs, and how can we ensure as we move forward that as we're thinking about things like out of school time programs or learning programs and enrichment programs, how are we making sure that early care and education programs and school districts are really intentionally working together for families with multi-age children who are trying to navigate during such a challenging time? So I just wanted to make sure that we raise that up. The other, I think, really critical part of this is when we talk about children and having academic loss or learning loss over this time frame, which is so critically important. I do want to again just put a point of advocacy that learning begins from birth, and so we have many young children under the age of 3 who are also not getting the kinds of early identification that's necessary in order to prevent more adverse long-term outcomes. So as we think about early care and education, I really would push all of us to really make sure we're thinking about what young children, birth through 5 are not receiving by way of early intervention services and support services and early identification. And we have to make sure that the kinds of development that could have happened in quality early childhood programs may not be happening if they don't have access and their families don't have access to quality care. And then I would just raise up how we think about that through resources and supports moving forward, really understanding the kinds of infrastructure that's needed, like early childhood mental health consultation and childcare health consultation, as avenues to ensure that children and families are supported so they can grow and thrive, particularly given all of the struggles and challenges that we've all mentioned earlier, like economic security, housing insecurity, food insecurity, and all of these other destabilization that's happening. We have to really pay attention to what may be happening for children on a go forward and for families. So I'm hopeful around, you know, potential rescue dollars that the new administration is putting out, potentially recovery dollars as we move forward. But I think raising up that we're really looking at a from birth through school age system in multiple arenas at multiple settings, and being innovative. I think we can wrap our arms around all of those things for our children and families, particularly during this time.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dr. Fraga. I am going to ask you to stay off mute because I have a question, a kind of a follow-up question for you. So can you give us some examples of innovative early childhood programs and states that are providing policy and practice support during the pandemic, and what we need moving forward?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll just say that I know there are you and others on the phone that have really great innovative programs. So I'll pause on holding those things up because I know you will yourself share those, and I have affinity for that. I'll just raise up a couple. So in Baltimore City Child Care Resource Center has an infant and early childhood mental health consultation program. So I'll raise that up, sort of extending on what I shared earlier. And what they started to do is they started to provide online support groups for childcare providers in Baltimore City to connect and share strengths and struggles, as well as ideas, tips, and insights. I think one of the things that we've learned that's so critical is connecting, the importance and how critical connections are. And these teachers and educators really needed an opportunity to voice the kinds of things that they were experiencing and getting the kinds of supports that they needed in order to support the children in their care. And they continue to find different ways to strengthen and, again, engage families in their program, providing consultation and support with the center director, which is also very important. How are we not only supporting the educators in the classroom, but also the administrators and the directors and programs to also create reflective learning spaces, because they too are needing that information. And the kinds of hands-on tools and learning activities through email, through Zoom, some of the things that we've already spoken to is something that Baltimore is doing. Erin might want to speak to this one as well, but I'll just raise this up. Child Care Aware of Virginia, Erin may be familiar with too, has supported the social emotional needs of families in Virginia by having a series of classes on trauma-informed care. Really, really critical for childcare providers across the state. Again, hands-on techniques, addressing and redirecting childhood behaviors. Dr. Gigi mentioned that a little earlier about how critically important it is for us to really think about the kinds of behaviors our children and our educators and our parents are experiencing with their young ones. And also looking at what we don't want to see happen, and what we've worked on for a number of years prior to COVID is expulsion and suspension of early care of young children and programs and early childhood programs, but having supports and training around trauma-informed care, really understanding social emotional learning and the challenges associated with the kind of trauma that children truly with the kinds of insecurities that they've experienced really have, I think is really important to raise that up. So those are a couple of examples, Tara. You know, I could go on and on, but those are the ones that I'm just going to raise up now. But a real shout out to early childhood mental health consultation, I think, in this moment, and the supports and training that's necessary for educators and for program leaders. Yeah,
thank you so much. Does anyone want to add to that? Just some programs, some innovative things that are happening that you all are aware of?
So DBH and the mayor's office, if you're in DC area, and you don't have to be in DC to attend, but they have Wellness Wednesday every Wednesday afternoon at 5:30 for families. And it's a place where families, you don't have to be early childhood. You can be anywhere on the spectrum of children and families, where you can come and talk and get support no matter what it is. They also have Tuesdays Together, which is another space for families to come in not 2 weeks, actually, it's next week, Friday, from Wednesday to Friday, because families have just been so overwhelmed. We're hosting a self-care summit for caregivers of young children. That includes teachers, administrators, and most of all families, where it's just 2 days where you can just come and just pour into yourself and get strategies for supporting yourself first and then your children.
Mhm.
Also, Healthy Futures is expanding their early childhood mental health consultation and adding a whole lot more centers to that.
Oh,
As
wow.
Yes, and DBH has a resource that families can call into at 1-887-WE-HELP. And no matter what your concern is, whether it is online learning, whether it's I just don't understand my child, don't understand my child's behavior, or I just have questions, you can call that number. Or especially for families who are grieving as well, because we've had a lot of loss, they can call that number and they will find whatever your concern is, they will find the appropriate person for you and you will get time limited consultation.
Wow, that is great. Thank you for sharing those resources. I think we've put those resources in the chat as well. I want to mention, Dr. Gigi, you said something about the self-care for parents or caregivers first and the children. I'd like to use someone shared this with me one time where they talked about parents, especially parents of young children. We tend to pour out so much into our children and taking care of our children. But I was reminded that when you are on an airplane, they tell you to secure your gas mask first before you try to help someone else, right? Because if you stop breathing, you can't help them. So just making sure that we share the resources about self-care and making sure that parents and caregivers are taking care of themselves as well. I mean, a lot of times it's kind of difficult to do it first, but if you at least keep it in the front of your mind that it's something that's important and it's going to help you to be able to help your children, then it's definitely a great resource. So thank you so much for that.
Coincidentally, the focus of the summit next week is accessing your well. And the well, we've all heard of the pitcher, right? And so we're the caregivers, we're the pitchers. And so we always talk about filling your pitcher so that you can pour into the cups of your children. Well, where do you get your pitcher filled? And so at the summit, we'll be talking about what is the well and the intentionality of going to the well to fill up your pitcher so you can pour into those cups.
Very good. I like that. I think I'm going to borrow that.
I will send you the information on it so you know what it is. That we also have a toolkit that's coming out filled with strategies for families as well. And if you're interested in getting a copy of it, you can always reach out.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Christina, did you want to add, talking a little bit about innovative programs?
I do, thank you. Something that I'm very proud of, Easterseals has developed the Easterseals at Home program. And some of you had discussed it. It really is not just a tool to support children at home while their parents become the educators while they, stay at home instead of coming back to the centers, but it also supports the parents as well. Easterseals at Home uses the creative curriculum that the classrooms use, but it's just been adapted to an easy to use lesson plan tool for parents at home. The guides lay out the entire lessons. They tell parents exactly what to say. There's no questions. There's no, it's very, very easy to follow. In addition to the lesson plans that are provided, expert educators are also, like I said, there to support the parents and the teachers. They have weekly calls, not just with the children, but with the parents as well. Just trying to check in, seeing if there are any resources or tools or even just support through the day that they might need. It doesn't even have to be related to the lesson plan, just trying to figure out how to engage their children at home. Even if they don't get to the lesson plans, we've heard that some parents just, with their daily schedules cannot get to the activities that have been planned, but tools and tips that they can utilize at home to continue to keep their children engaged. With the Easterseals at Home program, parents also receive a kit. And in this kit, they receive all of the resources necessary from the materials and books. And so just to kind of highlight this last cohort that we did, it was on fitness. The children got hula hoops, yoga mats, weights. They got tools to measure and different things like that. And then they received 8 books, none of it to be returned to the center, but everything to be kept at home to be reused for another time. And again, the program has been successful thus far. Parents are enjoying it. The children are enjoying it. Having the opportunity to continue the curriculum that they had been used to in the classroom at home, in addition to having the opportunity to engage with other children and teachers. So we're really, really excited, and we're looking forward to seeing where this program can go.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting program. I hear that the books that go to the homes are the most popular part, and that's always a good thing, right?
Yes.
We love to keep kids engaged in learning. Did anyone else want to join in to share anything about the innovative programs that you're aware of that are helping us, helping children and families? No? Anyone? I think we've covered a lot. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we're at 2:50. I have not been paying attention to the time the whole time. I wanted to ask Erin, if you are aware of looking at the 2019, 2020, and this year so far from a data perspective, how are children tracking academically? You have any information about that?
I do. And I don't think it'll surprise anybody. It's not a particularly positive picture from what we can tell at a state level. I think the first thing that we all have to be aware of, and this is just speaking of school enrollment, we could spend a whole other hour talking about the impact on childcare enrollment, but from just enrollment to what we can tell from academic measures, the picture is not great. So we know that in Virginia for pre-K, there are approximately 18% less pre-K students enrolled than in a typical year, and 13% less kindergartners enrolled. This is dramatically worse than all of the upper grades, which average about 5% and 3% as kids get older. So the drop in enrollment was much larger for our pre-K and kindergarten students. Beyond just for our pre-K and kindergarten students, we know from looking at our data this year that the pre-K drops are 4 times larger among children from economically disadvantaged families. They're larger for Black and Hispanic students compared to white and Asian students, really showing a disparity in who's even enrolling. And this is just getting kids in the door or on the screen, as the case may be this year. And we know that the virtual seems to have had a big impact. So we know that for pre-K programs that are solely virtual, the drop was about 20% in enrollment, whereas divisions that offered some in-person hybrid options, it was about 12%. So definitely bigger for those who are virtual only for our pre-K students. And then when we start to look at the data as far as kids are doing, we really see already a pretty dramatic difference in what we can measure for young children's academic outcomes. So in Virginia, we do a statewide Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program. The percent in children not meeting those markers went up this year. It's now 45% of kindergartners started without the key literacy, math, and social emotional skills that we measure as baseline to be successful in kindergarten. Specifically around literacy, we saw that that drop was larger than we've ever seen. We've been assessing literacy in Virginia since 1997, And the drop in literacy for kindergartners this year was 5 times larger than anything we've ever seen before in a year-to-year comparison. And we see a lot of concerns on social emotional well-being being reported from kindergarten and pre-K teachers. So it sounds bleak. I share those numbers because I think it's important that folks keep in mind that we can see immediately really the impacts, and maybe this is the impact of the fall. My projection is that it's likely the impact of last spring, right, when things like very abruptly shut down and we missed a good portion of the school year last year, especially when we're talking about the kindergartners. As far as approaches in Virginia, we're really aggressively pushing on expanding our preschool options. So we've been very fortunate to continue to have the support of Governor Northam and the administration there. So we do see some investments in preschool programming and recognition for childcare teachers there. We see some opportunities to expand the way that we measure and support social emotional learning. And as I spoke to earlier, I think we all are going to have to really shift our mindset and our conversation to how we make up for some of this learning loss, because these social emotional windows and these literacy windows are tight. The skills are so important. And if we can already see some of these kind of jarring statistics, they feel heavy, but we as the adults need to use that to motivate ourselves to really be creative in the solutions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that information. That's those statistics are a bit startling, but I think maybe somewhere in the back of our minds, we were expecting it a little bit. I know that just trying to make the switch from the classroom environment to virtual learning as early childhood providers, it was a huge switch. The first thing is that haven't we always been told that computers were bad for children? It was just so tough. And I just kept hearing myself say, but they aren't supposed to have more than 15 minutes a day in front of the screen. What happened to no more than 2 hours of screen time in a week? It's kind of real difficult as adults to unlearn what we've learned. And so that's one of the things when I was talking earlier about just trying to unlearn. And now that we've kind of gotten into, I guess, a bit of a routine with virtual learning, we may need to unlearn again. So if it's difficult for us, we have to anticipate that the children are going to have some difficulties with it as well. Although I am going to share that I believe they have done the best job ever with wearing masks and social distancing. I have been completely excited to see children with their masks on. Some children have, creatively made their own mask or colored their own mask, and they are all aware of what social distancing means. Just imagine, I know 10 months ago, none of us thought that a 4-year-old would keep a mask on all day, right? So there is a such thing as good peer pressure. If all of your friends are wearing masks, you want to wear a mask. That's all to it. So there are some things that we have learned from this, and this has been a really great conversation. I think we have a poll. We have a poll that I'm supposed to put up. Oh, thank you. So there is, in our poll, we asked about which of the following brought you here today. And we have some people who have responded to our poll. And what do you think about remote learning? Looks like 63% people say it has potential, but it needs improvement. And then we have those who says they can't wait for it to end. So just wanted to share with you all the results from our poll. And I guess we're going to begin to wrap up. Any last words from anyone about remote learning or what it is that we can look for in the future as we get?
I'll just close out that, we were focused on the homework gap for 10 years before COVID. So we've been, dealing with digital equity issues in populations for a long time, and that's not going to change, right? We're going to have some continued economic hardship even after the virus is long gone. So we do need to continue to think about whether people are in school, even when they leave school and they just need to work on their homework after school, like they need to be able to have equal, equitable access to technology to support their learning.
I would just add, Tara, really quickly that I am so heartened by the attention that early care and education has received over this last year, even as we've had to fight through and raise up the importance of our educators and our young children. I am really motivated that as we move forward, that there will continue to be attention regarding a from birth through school age agenda that will ensure that our children are supported and that we're paying attention to the disparities and equities that are inherent in our systems and really raise up the opportunity for change in this moment. And I think we have a national community that is rallying around us in a different way than prior to the pandemic. The real importance of our spaces and places where children learn, I think has received some level of attention. We have to keep on raising that attention up.
I agree. 100%. And I am excited as well because we have a really new look at early childhood educators now, and the program overall, how important we are. I'm so excited. We always knew we were important, right? It was just convincing the world. So, but yes, I agree. Dr. Gigi, did you want to say something in closing?
Sure. I know we didn't get to this, but like I said, a lot of changes in behaviors are occurring. And I want educators, parents, whoever is listening to know that even if children are displaying those symptoms of anxiety and fear, that the most important thing that I want you to do is to just validate their feelings. So if you don't know any other mental health strategy or social emotional strategies, just please just be there for them, be available to talk to them and validate their feeling. Don't shove it aside. Let them talk to you.
Right. Thank you so much. That is very important. That's quite important. Christina, did you want to say anything in closing?
I think just to piggyback off of Dr. Gigi, I definitely also feel that is important. Their vocabulary is already limited. Although they can talk up a storm, they don't know how to really express how they're feeling and to take that into account when teachers, parents are seeing these behaviors in the classroom. Definitely think that is important.
Yeah, thank you. Erin, you want to close us out?
Sure. I would echo many of the thoughts of my fellow panelists here. I think we are in a really unique moment for early childhood nationally and in our states respectively in the level of attention that's being paid to it. And it will really be up to us to make the most of that as things are coming our way. I think the other thing that I don't think I got a chance to say is just how amazed I am by teachers. And I know we have many closer to teachers on the line today, but the work that has been done this year has really just shown us what's possible in the education sphere for early childhood. And not that anybody ever doubted how amazing early childhood teachers were, but the amount that we have learned in just the span of a year is really phenomenal. So, I feel relatively optimistic about what we can take from what we've learned this year and what we can do going forward. And I'm excited to see what's next.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it. We've had a really great conversation. I think we could all go on and on because there are so many different facets of this one subject matter. But thank you all for joining us. Easterseals, thanks you. And we look forward to our continuing partnerships with each of you. And please feel free to reach out to us if you find the need to need some of our services or more information about any of the services or program at Easterseals. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today. Have a good day.